Cool. Okay. Great. So, as we discussed previously, you've been given a list of questions. We talked about the fact that you can just skip any question you don't want to answer or anything like that.
Yep.
Well in advance. If you need to take a break or something like that, if an ambulance goes by, that's the only thing that we're going to cut, or if you say something that you don't want in the interview. Okay? So, let's get started. Can you tell me about the community that you grew up in?
There were a lot of varied communities because my family moved around every 3 or 4 years.
Okay, fair enough.
In the earlier parts of my life, there were more Christian-based, Christian-focused communities. As I moved into what we call high school, it kind of expanded into more wasn't forced to go to church or anything like that. It was more of a just live your life by Christian values, but we're not going to make you do things that you don't want to do.
Any particular denomination?
I want to say I was raised either Episcopalian or Presbyterian, but I'm not 100% sure.
Okay.
Because those were the churches that we would go to, but with the moving around everywhere, it varied. My family wanted to find churches that they liked the community in rather than having a specific denomination that they wanted to ascribe to.
Okay. You may not be able to answer this because, as you said, you moved around a lot. How did your family compare? How would your family describe itself from a religious standpoint compared to the communities that you were in?
They would describe themselves as just Christian.
Okay.
As far as I am aware. Whereas I would describe how I was raised as Christian by proxy. In that my parents raised me how they were raised.
Right.
And they were raised in a Christian religion.
Okay.
But with us moving around a lot, I was exposed to a lot of different ideas and denominations.
Okay, so there was a lot of variation in terms of the denomination. Was there a lot of variation in terms of exposure to other religions?
Probably some. In that, even though there were religious schools I went to, there were people who weren't necessarily of the religion of the school.
Okay.
But they went to the school because their parents taught there, or their parents worked at the school, so they got an easier time with tuition.
Okay. So that does get into our next question. So you went to religious school most of your childhood?
Up through about 6th grade.
Up through 6th grade, okay.
Yes, and there were 2 different religious schools. One was a Wesleyan, which was early kindergarten through 2nd grade.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't remember much of that.
Okay.
And then the second one was I want to say a Southern Baptist.
Okay.
Which was 4th through 6th grade.
Okay. And then after that, did you still go to Sunday school? Was there any formal religious education? Was it just in the house?
It was mostly in the house. After leaving the Baptist school, it was the occasional... There was never really a Sunday school. It was more like accompanying parents to church.
Okay.
But they never yelled at me to pay attention to the sermons. Because
Right.
I would get distracted and would read my own book or something like that.
You bring books to church?
Mm-hmm.
Huh. Okay.
When you say it's mostly in the home, can you talk a little bit about kind of the messages or the values that you felt like your parents were handing over?
I would say they handed over a lot of the core foundation of Christianity, of love thy neighbor, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, charity is a virtue, always try and help people if you can, try and be kind to others because you don't know what anybody else is going through. Just those core virtues and values
Okay.
would be what was given examples of at home.
Okay. Okay. So, given that, how religious were... We've talked about your family, we've talked about your school. How religious were your friends?
It varied. I would say that they were probably more religious when I was in the religious schools,
Mm-hmm.
but it is never something that we lengthily discussed especially in the early years where you just kind of, I'm Christian because my family is Christian. Like you haven't given it a lot of deep thought about it.
Okay.
So it was kind of like, we're all here at this Christian school, and so that must mean we're all Christians, because that's the type of logic.
And it just wasn't talked about a lot.
Yeah, it just wasn't really talked about a lot. Even if you were like a separate, even if I went to the Baptist school, but we went to an Episcopalian church, like it just wasn't talked about.
So you never had any discussions when you were younger where one of your friends would say explicitly that they weren't Christian?
Not to my remembrance, no.
Okay. All right. Okay. Interesting. What about high school?
High school was one of the first times I went to a large public school,
Okay.
and so I was exposed to a lot of different values than what I was raised on. Even though there were still some of the undercurrents of like be kind to others and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
High school was also the first time that I met people who self-ascribed to be Satanists or to be Buddhists or just a variety of other religions.
So that was the first time you encountered people who were explicitly saying, I am not a Christian, this is my value system.
Correct.
Okay. What was that like for you?
It was interesting. I think it brought about more of a sense of curiosity because having been raised Christian, it was not spoken a lot about in my family of other religions. And meeting people who were open about talking about their different religion just brought about more of a opening of horizons. Like there's this whole other side of humanity that I haven't learned about and can learn about through talking to these people.
Okay. So you first got exposed to other theologies
Mm-hmm.
and other ways of thinking in high school. And then what happened after that?
I would still say that through high school I labeled myself as Christian. And through the first half of college, I would also label myself as Christian.
Okay.
And it wasn't until probably senior year of college that I started keeping the core values but not labeling myself as Christian.
Okay. All right. So things started to. Yeah.
When you say that you kept the core values but you didn't label yourself as Christian, were there any differences that you felt in your behavior and your attitude? Or is this more something where you felt like the label had changed but nothing?
It was more, I felt the label had changed, but how I lived my life continued more or less the same.
Okay.
It was like, still be kind to others, be kind to thy neighbors, do unto others as you would do unto them. But it was more like, this is something that all people should do. Not just Christians, not just people of other, like this is just like how I came about it was, this is the core values of being a person. Of being a human should be, you be kind to others, you try and take care of others, you help others when they ask for it, type of thing.
So you never had any, it sounds like you never had any problem with the fundamental values you were being taught.
No, it's more, any of the problems I had with Christianity were more the specific details.
When you say specific details, what do you mean?
Going through college and being exposed to even more people of different religions, and seeing how like good people can be, even though they're of a different religion, which is something that was vague when I was growing up. It was hard to reconcile having a loving God and that same loving God putting people into punishment for eternity.
Okay. Can you clarify that a little bit? Because it sounds to me like you're talking about the possibility of people who aren't Christian going to hell.
Yes.
Okay. Is that was one of the claims that you had a problem with?
Yes.
Okay.
In that you have to only accept one Christian God, or you will be going to hell or punished for eternity, or even in the Catholic religion, you go to purgatory.
Right. Okay, so it was this claim that sort of polytheists or other people who weren't Christian could potentially not go to a better place in the afterlife.
Like they could live the most virtuous life, be an extremely good person, far better than I could ever be, and they would still be punished for not believing in the right thing.
Okay.
From a loving God.
What about that made you question the veracity of Christianity?
I'm not sure.
Because I'm just asking because I think you can agree that there are Christians who believe that it bothers them,
Yes.
but they don't doubt that it's correct.
Yes. It was, I don't know, like I said, it's hard to reconcile like having a God who loves everybody, but if they don't love him back in this very specific way,
Right.
they get punished for it.
Was this the main kind of spike for you, or were there other things that also were kind of stumbling blocks that you're like, I can't buy this as a doctrine because of that?
I would say that would probably be the main spike, that someone who on the other side of the world like has never heard of Christianity and still lives a virtuous life
Okay.
would still get punished for not even knowing that there was a Christian God.
Okay.
It seemed very, I don't know, kind of tunnel vision-ish.
Right.
Like there's only this and there's no possibility of
Yeah.
anything else being happening.
So, did that? I guess what I'm asking is, was there a tipping point? Like, was there a point where you started thinking about this, you thought about it for a long time, and then one day you're like, hey, wait a minute, maybe it's not that this is not that this weird claim about, well, weird. This claim about hell is not the problem. It's actually the doctrine making the claim in the first place. That, because you said senior years when you started to stop identifying as Christian.
I would say that there were a bunch of tiny things from hanging out with Christians of other denominations.
Sure.
With people of other faiths, just like how they would talk about their faith. And things like, it's just a bunch of tiny things that kind of built itself up into I need to think about this in a much more deep and introspective way.
Okay.
To see if it is right for me.
Did most of this process happen in your head, or was there a specific like resource or something that you got exposed to that also you were using to think about this? Was there some specific...
A good portion of it happened in my head.
Yeah.
There were people that I talked to at the time, some of whom I've lost contact with over the years. My roommate at the time was also going through something similar, where he was reading a lot of Zen Buddhist doctrine, and he was also raised Christian,
right.
And so he was having these deep conversations with his family.
Yeah.
And he would come to me and we would talk about it because we had similar upbringings, and so he wanted to get my views on it, and like having discussions with him about it helped kind of reaffirm the direction that the choices that I was making, and not including a label of Christianity.
Okay. But there was never like a defining tipping point or something. It was just this sort of gradual erosion.
Yeah, it was just a kind of gradient of like moving from one to a different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then one day you kind of wake up and you're like, hey, I don't.
Yeah, and one day it was like, I haven't been to church and I haven't been to a sermon in I don't know how many years. I haven't talked to anybody about the Bible or anything like that. I haven't spoken with a priest or a pastor or minister in however long. And it was just kind of like, well, I can keep the core values because I think those are a great foundational purpose to have a moral compass. But I don't need all the extraneous baggage and direction that comes with Christianity.
And you didn't feel comfortable talking to your folks about this?
It was never something that was really talked about growing up. And even now, religion and specific like belief practices and things like that are not, or talked about very vaguely or not at all in my family.
Okay. And you didn't feel comfortable talking to were you even going to church in college?
I went to some services, more as not out of a sense of I needed to go to the services,
Yeah.
but more I had friends who would go to the services and who wanted to bring me along and show me their type of what their service at their church was.
Okay.
So I went to services at like a Lutheran church, a Methodist church, a New Age Christian church, like the Fellowship of Christian Athletes would hold meetings that some of my friends would go to and ask me to come along. And it was a good way to like meet new people and see different perspectives and points of view, but I never sought to go myself.
And you didn't feel comfortable talking to anybody there about your doubts, kind of?
There were a couple groups who I talked with about the root views of Christianity and where I was going with it, but there were opposing viewpoints that I, at the time, could not agree with.
Mm-hmm.
One of the biggest examples was one of the people I was talking with likened life to a bike wheel, and that God is the center of the wheel, the axle, and then you have your health and your mental health and your physical health, your spiritual health, and all the different other things in your life as the spokes to the wheel of your entire life. And I fundamentally disagreed that God would be the axle, because the axle should be the singular person. Because without the person, there is no view of the God from that point. Like, you need a person to have the questions of spiritual health and mental health and physical health and religious health and things like that. Without the person, I don't think there would be a belief in God.
I'm going to rephrase what you said, in other words, to make sure I understood you. Basically, you as an individual should put yourself at the center of your life, because without that, nothing else makes sense.
Yes.
Okay. And other people did not view life that way.
Other people viewed as God should be the center of your life.
Yeah.
Everything you do should be like for the glory of God, because you come from God.
Yeah.
Like, God is who brought you into existence, who gave you this body and this mind and this spirit and soul and everything like that. So God should be at the center of your life.
Did you agree with the surrounding kind of supporting claims that, like, did you at any point, or while you were still going to services, did you think that this was true, at least in the sense that God made you, God made the earth? Or was that all kind of like, I don't agree with those claims, and that's why this doesn't make sense? Or what I'm trying to understand is, was this sort of based on truth claims that, like, you don't agree with the truth claims that God made you? Or is it based on ethical claims that you don't think God should be the center of your existence just because God made you?
I think it would be more on the ethical claims that God should be. I don't think God should be the center of existence just because he made you.
Okay.
Because while I haven't moved entirely, like I have stopped labeling myself as Christian, I haven't moved entirely away from the spiritual aspect of it, of like, there could very well be a higher power who made everything.
Okay.
But that higher power would be like likening us to an ant. Like, there's no way that we can conceptualize what that higher power would be.
Would you say that what you just said is your sort of view right now of the whole concept of, is there a God, in a nutshell, basically?
I would say that is a fairly accurate way of how I look at things, is that if there is a higher power, there is no way for us to conceptualize what that higher power is, or if there would even be one, because he's so far outside of the realm of like what we know and can experience that it would be impossible to know. Okay.
All right. So when you realized that your viewpoint had shifted so far away from a truth claim standpoint, not a value standpoint, just so far away from Christianity that, like, you're not in the same camp anymore, do you feel like you had any resources at all to sort of turn to, other than, as you said, your roommate, you know?
My roommate was a big one.
Yeah.
He was who I spoke with the most about it. I had a bunch of friends from different faiths and backgrounds who we would just have like what we would call like a balcony time and just like sit and just chat on the balcony, and some of the conversations would always turn to religion. And so I would hear from like how one of my friends was a lapsed Catholic and how they viewed things. Another friend was agnostic, another was raised atheist. Like my roommate was going through Buddhist texts and trying to figure out how that came about. And so yeah, I would say I had other resources to turn to, but they wouldn't be your normal traditional like family or a spiritual advisor or anything like that.
Okay. And okay, all right, fair enough, legit. Okay. So right now in your life, are you out as, I guess you could describe yourself as sort of a former Christian, still a theist, to your family at all?
My brother knows.
Okay.
I give vague answers to my parents.
Okay.
Mostly because like it is hard to overcome the inertia of never talking about religion in specifics with your family.
Yeah.
And when my parents have asked on the rare occasion just to double check that I'm still like they have asked if I still have faith, and I'm like, oh, I have my faith, and I give vague answers to that.
And they don't dig?
Yeah, they don't dig because it's not something we talk about.
Okay. All right. And your friends, you're sort of, if any of your friends ask.
Oh yeah, if any of my friends ask, I'll let them know and give them my perspective.
Where you're at. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So, as somebody who, I'm going to use a term here and you can agree with it. You're still a theist. You still believe that there's something out there? Or you think there might be something out there?
I think there might be.
Okay.
There is. I think the idea of a higher power is comforting.
Right.
Because the universe and this world is chaotic and terrifying and beautiful and frightening and amazing and is all of these things, and people want there to be some semblance of order to it. And having the thought of a higher power directing things brings people comfort.
Okay. Okay. Do you, in that position, do you feel like did you get any advice? Do you feel like there's advice that people should hear kind of if they're having doubts and they're Christian?
If they are having doubts, talk to people that you trust, talk to people that you love if you can, and be open to new perspectives and experiences.
Okay. Okay. Do you feel like there's any bad advice that you've received?
It's quite possible I have received bad advice in the past, but because it was like pretty far back. With the metamorphosis of like becoming not labeled Christian and things like that, I have probably recognized it as bad advice or learned that it was bad advice in some way and have not remembered it.
Right. Right. Okay.
There's nothing specific that comes to mind that I would classify as bad advice.
Okay. How is your life different now?
It is more frightening at times, in that there is not, like, I don't fully believe that there's a higher power. So everything comes down on, like, me living this chaotic and terrifying, in this chaotic, amazing, terrifying world that we all live in.
Right.
And so it was, without the belief of like there is an order to it, it can be frightening at times.
Right.
But I feel like the basic values, the like virtues and values, helped with creating a foundational ethics and moral compass in my life that I still try to ascribe to.
Okay. All right. Okay. You've talked about your stance on the question of there being a God or gods, higher power. What is your stance on religion now?
It depends on the person. It can be a useful tool.
Yeah.
It can also be a harmful tool if it's used in a very us versus them kind of mindset. But I do know that there are communities where the church is the like big community thing. That's where all of your friends and family, and if you need help, you can go to the church for charity and they will help you with food or helping you pay your power bills and things like that if you have fallen on hard times. I think it is a useful tool for depending on the person, but I don't think you should blindly accept everything about their teachings. I think there needs to be more introspective thought about what they teach people.
Cool. I think that that's a good place to cut the mic. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed this video. If you would like to participate in the Secular Stories project, feel free to reach out via the email in the description below or through Facebook at Modern Contemplations. Participation can be completely anonymous and your identity can be protected. Thanks. Bye.